At the opening of the IUCN Congress, actor Harrison Ford said, "Reinforcements are on the way," referring to the young generation that will build a greener future. I can tell you, reinforcements already arrived. Lisa van der Geer is a well-known environmental and climate activist. She gave countless speeches of high-profile events. Currently, she's the acquisition manager of the Dutch Youth Climate Movement. Please give a warm welcome to Lisa van der Geer. And by the way, please, you can also interact through the chat in the YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl, for introducing me. Hi, everybody. Goedemorgen for the Dutch people here. Bienvenue à tous et à toutes. Thank you so much for coming. Actually, I'm incredibly happy to be here. And before I start my presentation, I actually have to make a confession, because usually I give speeches, 2, maybe 3-minute presentations aiming at maximal impact in a minimal amount of time. However, this presentation is an entire hour and I'm not really used to talking for that long, but I'll try my best to make it worthwhile for all of you. So here we go. First, I'm going to introduce myself, because some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, the Youth Summit was earlier. What is she doing here? Which is an excellent question. So I'm going to be explaining that to you in a little bit. And afterwards, I'm going to tell you something about our organization, the Dutch Youth Climate Movement. I work there, as Carl said, I'm the acquisition manager, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the stuff we did right and the stuff that worked, but I'm also going to tell you some of the mistakes we've made, because I hope that you can all learn something from that. And afterwards, we're going to move to communication, and we're going to meet Jack the fisherman. And Jack the fisherman is a really weird guy, because he doesn't speak English and he doesn't speak French either. He speaks something called B1. Now, if you don't know what that is, please stay tuned, because we're going to get there. And then we're about halfway through. So we're going to actually move to EcoMove, my moonshot prize winning idea. And just to end on a positive note, I solved it. I solved nature degrading because of climate change. I solved biodiversity collapsing. So we're going to talk about that, and it's going to be great. And afterwards, as a final note, I'm going to take you on a virtual sailing trip, because during the whole Corona pandemic, we all got a lot of experience with virtual meetings, with Zoom and Google Meet and Skype and what have you. So I thought, let's kick it up a notch. We're going to go on a virtual sailing tour. So here we go. Thanks. So awesome. So my climate change, sustainability, biodiversity journey actually started 6 years ago, when I was in the first year of secondary school. And I was part of the after-school speech and debate program, because I love debating. I love talking with people. I love arguing with them. And I especially like debating with the older years. But then something strange started to happen. I started actually losing debates. And I quickly noticed that this happened when I was talking about environmental stuff. And I always lost my debate if I had to argue against wind turbines or solar panels or tax on pollution. I just could not win those debates. So that's how I became interested. And interesting observation, actually, you're a really bad debater if you care about the topic you're debating. But yeah, so that's how I became interested. And after that, I became involved in several green Dutch youth organizations, including Friends of the Earth Netherlands, the Dutch National Youth Council, Students for Tomorrow, and most importantly, the Dutch Youth Climate Movement. I got introduced to the Dutch Youth Climate Movement a little over a year ago, and I became their youngest acquisition manager at 16. Now, my position is really interesting, that's because I talk to both the big bosses about our budget and what we're going to spend our money on, our long-term plan. But I also speak with all the volunteers who actually do the hard work, because they come to me whenever they need money for a new project. And because of my position, I've seen all the different sides of our organization. And so I think I might have some insight in what makes our organization so successful in the Netherlands. Quick disclaimer, I don't know the exact success recipe for a youth organization working for sustainability. I don't, but I do have my personal view on some of the things that did work and some of the things that didn't work. So I'm going to tell you about that. First, a few facts about the Dutch Youth Climate Movement. It's an organization, we founded it 5 years ago, and now we represent over 70 youth organizations. Not all of them are working towards sustainability. We also have organizations fighting income inequality and fighting for gender equality. So it's a whole bunch of different things. And all in all, we represent over 100,000 Dutch young voices. And we're very politically active on a national level. And because of our political activity, we actually recently won a prize for the most sustainable organization in the Netherlands. But the most important thing we do is organize all kinds of, well, cool events. We organize climate debates, right? Young people can talk about climate and what they think and what their personal vision is. We organize workshops and meetings, and we go to schools, we give lessons about sustainability. And all the while we get their opinion on what they think the future should look like, because our main job is representing them. We want to voice their opinion and give them a voice. So I'd like to tell you something about one of our most successful projects. It's called the Jonge Klimaatagenda, translated to the Youth Climate Agenda. It's a document, it describes a sort of utopian future. And the special thing about it is that we wrote it after organizing many workshops and events and meetings and talking with over 100,000 young adults and collecting their opinion. And only after we had their opinion on the future and what they would like to see in 2030, after we had their opinion, we wrote our document. So it's not our document, it's theirs. It's what over 100,000 young people in the Netherlands want the future to look like. Now we have 5 categories. We have, can you go one back? Actually, awesome. We have housing, work, education, food, and transport. And in summary, we want a sustainable future, CO2 neutral in 2030 for all those categories. It's not original, I know. But the special thing is, it's not what we want, it's what all the young people in the Netherlands want. And that's unique in our country. We're the only one who have that document. And because it represents so many people, a lot of people can stand behind it, a lot of organizations can support it, and that's awesome. But the special thing about the Dutch Youth Climate Movement is actually that we stay in our own lane. We're the Dutch Youth Climate Movement. We focus on climate, that's it. Sometimes there are organizations who simultaneously want to fight air pollution and work for income equality. And it can get a bit muddled. But we don't do that. We're focusing on climate. And we have a lot of other organizations we work with who work for gender equality and all kinds of other awesome things. And we support them fully, but that's not what we are. We fight for climate. And that's special, but we think it's not a competition. There's room for everyone. Every organization has its place, and we're the climate organization. But before I move on, I want to talk about one crucial step in making the Youth Climate Agenda. There is something called the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, and it describes 6 different levels of spoken and written language. On the one end, there's A1, which is basically, my name is Lisa and I like green. That's A1. On the other end of the scale, there's C2, which is university level. Now, our youth climate agenda was written at C3 level, just above university. It was absolutely beautiful with intertwined storylines, very poetic, a vocabulary surpassing a small dictionary. And we were kind of aiming for the Pulitzer Prize, so to speak. But the thing was, it didn't quite work. We had to rewrite it. It had to be simplified, which was a painful process, but it was necessary because we want to represent everyone. We don't just want to represent the university students. We want to represent everyone in the Netherlands. And for that, you need a simple document that everyone can read. So eventually, we managed to get down to about B1.5. We were aiming for B1, but the original author started crying too much because all this beautiful text was being deleted. So we had to stop at B1.5. And that's a very important message that people often forget. If you want to include everyone, you have to keep it really, really simple. And I just wanted to tell you that. And I wrote a small story to show you how these different levels of language work. I'm going to read it to you. You can read along on the screen. A1, this is Jack. A2, Jack is a fisherman. He catches fish. B1, in my opinion, he catches too much fish. B2, unfortunately, Jack does not understand the severity of the problem. C1, in Jack's opinion, his fishing rights are non-negotiable because of his cultural values and traditions. C2, it is therefore highly regrettable that climate activists who tend to speak at the upper end of the C language classification range are not able to comprehend the fact that communicating on B1 level is an essential part of the skill set for a climate activist to effectively communicate with people like Jack. In other words, and there's an acronym for this, KISS, keep it simple and short. And I happen to know a few things about kissing. Well, keeping it simple and short, that is. Because I like to give speeches, 2 to 3 minute presentations. And then it is absolutely vital that you keep it simple and you keep it short. One of the first speeches I wrote was in the Netherlands about air pollution. Let me just read the first few sentences to you. We are alive. Maybe we are poor or rich or young or old. Maybe we are refugees, or maybe we vote PVV, which is a right-wing political party in the Netherlands. But we're all alive. And to stay alive, we need air. I mean, come on, we need air. It cannot get simpler than that. Every sentence is basically A1 level. And of course, it had a personal story, a few solid scientific facts, and an uplifting ending note. But the main message remained: we need air. 100,000 people watching on live primetime television too. We need air. I mean, duh, but it worked. I won the competition with "we need air." And that's because this simple language is highly effective when talking to adults. Because the next thing that happened was that my French teacher walked up to me and she started telling me very proudly that she had just bought an electric car, which is of course awesome. So if you're wondering what the next step is in communicating with adults, positive reinforcement on A1 level, which sounds like very good. Again, very simple. It works. As a rule of thumb, you should remember, if your sentence is more than 5 words, just stop. 5 words is the maximum. Stop after 5 words. And that might sound very simple to a few of you, but actually simple text, writing good simple text is really difficult. When I write speeches, it takes me a full day to write a 1 minute of speech, full day per minute. So it's actually really hard, but it's worth it. It's worth it because it's effective and it's the best way to communicate with adults. However, do you remember Jack, our fisherman from the story? Last week, I was walking through the harbor and I took a picture of Jack, his ship fishing vessel. It's on the screen over there. And on Jack's fishing boat, there's a big banner. No to offshore wind turbines, it says in French. You can read it. No to offshore wind turbines. Preserve our heritage, preserve our traditions. Very simple, very effective, the perfect French kiss. However, let's think about this for a minute, because fishing vessels are big metal boxes with old diesel engines dragging cheap plastic through the ocean. That is not how people have been fishing the past millennia. However, what Jack says is preserve our heritage, preserve our tradition. Huh? Almahula, as we would say in the Netherlands. 93% of the Mediterranean fish stocks are overexploited. If we keep continuing Jack's tradition, by the time Jack's grandchildren go up, there will be a negative amount of fish in the Mediterranean. But you're all here at the IUCN Congress. I'm sure you know this. However, the truth of the matter is, most people prefer a good French kiss over solid scientific data. They would rather listen to Jack and read his banner than listen to the people at this Congress, because Jack keeps it simple. No to offshore wind turbines. Preserve our tradition. And he's very smart about this because he uses words like tradition and heritage. And these are intrinsically positive words. They're something worth fighting for. Facts be damned. Tradition is something that has to be preserved. It evokes emotion. But this is actually a very big problem. Let me just tell you why. Children copy their parents' behavior. If parents live in a tent, children expect to live in a tent when they grow up. If parents live in a castle, children expect to have a castle by the time they're adults. And this is a problem because we cannot keep living the life our parents had because the earth simply will not survive that. However, change is difficult. Change is hard. It requires flexibility, and flexibility is really difficult. Let me show you some mildly scientific data. I mean, it's from a journal of psychology, but it's from Marseille, so it's relevant. This is a study about children and how children make decisions. Because to make decisions, you need three things. You need inhibition, also known as self-control. You need flexibility, and you need to update your working memory. Now, what they did was they take small children, 5, 6 years old, kindergarten students, and they gave them a task to sort cards based on color. They had a whole deck of cards with green rabbits and blue buses and red boats. And the first task was to sort all these cards based on color. So red with red, blue with blue, green with green. Most children, 5 or 6 years old, are perfectly capable of doing this. However, then the second task came. Sort these same cards, but now based on objects. Rabbits with rabbits, boats with boats, buses with buses. And children who are perfectly capable of sorting cards by color suddenly fail to perform the second task. And that's because first they did the first task. Because they first sorted by color and then had to sort by object. They failed. They could not switch tasks. And what I want to demonstrate here is that flexibility is difficult. Flexibility is difficult for small children, but it's also difficult for adults. If we look at Jack the fisherman, he would have been perfectly capable to become an IT specialist. He would have been perfectly capable. He knows how a computer works. He could have learned that. But because he became a fisherman, now it's nearly impossible for Jack to become an IT specialist. It's in his head. The flexibility is not there. Adults have the same problem as small children. So I have an idea for Jack. It's called EcoMove. It's my moonshot idea to make nature more resistant against climate change. Let's look at the SDGs, because in the Netherlands, we have something called the SDG Action Day. It's the main SDG event in the Netherlands. It's quite unique, I think. I don't think any other country has it, actually. And it's a wonderful day. And what they did 1 year ago was they made a contest. They wanted someone to come up with a long shot idea to reach as many SDGs as possible, a moonshot idea, they called it. Well, I read that and I thought, game on, let's win this. So let's look. Can you move to the next slide? So let's look at the SDGs. There's 17 of them. They're the Sustainable Development Goals. The UN made them. We want to reach them by 2030 to have a sustainable future for everyone. You might have heard of them. Let's look at number 1. No poverty. I started thinking, if climate change really starts going and the climate starts warming up and we surpass the 1.5 degrees, the 2 degrees warmer climate, that's going to be really difficult to reach the SDGs. I mean, no poverty, that's really hard when your house got blown away by a hurricane. Number 2, no hunger. That's really difficult with droughts becoming more and more common. Same with good health. Tropical diseases are spreading because of climate change. Now, good education and gender equality might actually be possible. They're not directly related to climate change, so they're good. Let's go. But fresh water is really difficult with rivers drying out and glaciers disappearing. Now, 7 and 8, great. Let's go. Awesome. Let's start today. But number 9, infrastructure, again, really difficult with mudslides wiping away whole towns. And you get the idea. The SDGs are really difficult to reach with climate change. So that was my challenge. Let's try and do something about climate change so that all these other SDGs can be reached as well. Now, here you see a picture of the Hoge Veluwe National Park. It's a national park in the Netherlands. It's 55 square kilometers, quite small, but the Netherlands is a small country, so that happens. Now, there is a problem. Our national park is not aware that climate change is going to happen. These trees, these spiders, microorganisms, every single organism, they don't know that the climate is going to change. And there's another problem. Our national park is already low on biodiversity. So once the climate starts changing, it doesn't have the resilience to adapt. And that's a problem because nature is essential for human life. Now, climate change used to be called global warming. And climate change is, of course, a better description. But global warming explained that it's a global problem. Everyone on the whole planet has to deal with it. Everywhere, there's no escape possible. And then I started thinking about the SDGs again. Because how on earth can we achieve our sustainable development goals with climate change? So let's solve this. Here we see a map. I mean, it's a map. You can see that. It's a map of Europe, and it was made by something called the Climate Matching Tool. It's a wonderful tool. If you haven't heard of it yet, go look it up. The website's on the screen. And what it does is it shows what regions have the climate that the Netherlands will have in 50 years. So there is a little green tree in the Netherlands, and the orange and the yellow places describe have a climate now that will be in the Netherlands in 50 years' time. All right, it sounds very logical as well. The climate it's going to get warmer. So to find the climate that the Netherlands will have in 50 years' time, you just have to move south along the Atlantic coast. It's very logical. So if you look at the red circle, that's the best match that we have. That's in a French city called Rennes. The climate in Rennes is identical to the climate we will have in the Netherlands in 50 years' time. Now, this is a picture of a forest near Rennes. And this forest has the exact same problem that our national park, the Hoge Veluwe, has. These trees also don't know that the climate is going to change. Now, from a global perspective, it would be therefore much better if we could just relocate this entire forest and place it in the Netherlands. In a new location, it has the same climate, the climate that it's used to, the climate that all the organisms have adapted to. And there, this forest will flourish and maintain its biodiversity instead of degrading due to climate change. Now, the essence of my moonshot idea is that we should just put this entire forest on wheels, so to speak, and relocate it to a new location so that it's not affected by climate change. Now, this poses a few problems. First of all, if we were to pick up this forest and move it to the Netherlands, there's going to be a very big gap in France. And there might be some people who don't like that. Local communities, IUCN, nature conservatists, generally they don't like big gaps of dirty land where once a beautiful forest was. So that's a problem. Second problem, it's not easy to relocate an entire forest. Technically speaking, you need a lot of wheels to do that. It's not easy. Third of all, it might be considered stealing. We in the Netherlands get a beautiful piece of French nature, but the French have nothing left. So the French people might feel like we're stealing their nature, and we don't want that because we like France. Now, there's a problem of invasive species. You're moving nature, so naturally there's going to be cause of concern for invasive species. And last problem, we get a new forest in the Netherlands, but what are we going to do with our old trees? Are we just going to burn them? People might have issues with that as well. And I will talk about all these issues later. But for now, it's important to focus on the fact that for this particular forest near Rennes, it's by far the best solution to be moved to the Netherlands so that it can move with its usual climate and that it can flourish and maintain its biodiversity. Now, this is already being done on a tiny scale. There are already wonderful companies introducing individual organisms to, for example, reforested land to upgrade its biodiversity. But no one has ever thought of doing it with an entire ecosystem. And with EcoMove, I propose to literally move pieces of the top layer of soil, possibly meters deep, including all microorganisms and small animals, including all trees and vegetation growing on top of that, over distances of maybe hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. And this effectively introduces a climate change resistant ecosystem that not only self-preserves, but also, more importantly, prevents the surrounding area from collapsing in terms of biodiversity. Now, this is a drastic solution, but that was the idea. It's a moonshot, and actually, I won the prize. So more people liked it, and everyone in the audience was actually surprised by the simplicity of it, because in essence, it's very simple. Move a piece of nature so that it can go with its usual climate. However, as I said, there are a few challenges. So let's move on. As I said, it leaves a gap in France to move their forest, and French people might not like that. And again, there's the problem of what we're going to do with the trees in the Netherlands, because we get a new forest, but what are we going to do with our old trees? However, as it turns out, there's a solution for this. Let's go back to our climate matching tool. Now the green tree is near Rennes, and we can see what areas currently have the climate that Rennes will have in 50 years' time. Now, again, red circle, this is near Bordeaux, I think. Yes, Bordeaux. They might be very happy to donate a piece of their nature to Rennes. We can ship the forest of Rennes to the Netherlands without the French people getting very angry, which is also great. Now, let's look at what we're going to do with our old trees in the Netherlands. Again, climate matching tool, green tree in the Netherlands. Now the map shows the areas that would be happy to receive the Dutch nature. They show areas that will have the Dutch climate that we have now, but they will have it in 50 years' time. So let's just give our national park, Hoge Veluwe, to Denmark. They will have a similar climate. They will be happy to receive it. And my moonshot idea is to realize that climate change can actually be seen as a global jigsaw puzzle. And climate change has caused this puzzle to become messed up. And we need to move every piece of nature to a new location to minimize the effects of climate change. So, first two problems have been solved with international collaboration, which, as it happens, is actually a separate SDG. So we achieved that as well. Great. However, there are some more problems. Invasive species. Now, you're moving nature, so there's a risk of species becoming invasive. And I know how annoying invasive species are, because in the Netherlands, we have something called the eikenprocessierups. Now, they're cute little fluffy caterpillars, and in summertime, they're everywhere. Now, I have a picture on the screen. When those fluffy, cute little hairs touch your skin, yeah, the second picture happens. It's not good. It's really not good. So we have to be careful with invasive species. But the truth is, invasive species are already here. They're already happening. And due to climate change, they're only going to get worse. And actually, EcoMove helps fight against invasive species. Let me explain. Usually what happens with an invasive species is that one single animal travels to another place where it's not supposed to be. And because there are no natural predators, it becomes an invasive species, right? But with EcoMove, we move the entire ecosystem. So its natural predator travels with it. So it doesn't have the chance to become an invasive species. So actually, EcoMove fights against invasive species, which is great. Let's move on to the next problem though, because can it actually be done? Move an entire forest? Because technically that's difficult. Let's go to Canada. Let's go to the oil sands in Alberta. Now, Alberta is a wonderful state. It's home to 6 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It has one of the most beautiful sceneries in the world. However, they also do open pit mining. So let's focus on that. You can see here a picture. Many square kilometers of nature completely destroyed, far deeper than the top layer of the soil. Surely, if people are capable of doing that, they can move a small forest from the Netherlands around. And as it turns out, Yes, that is possible. I did the math. Let me show you. In the last 50 years, in Alberta, they mined a total of nearly 1,000 square kilometers of soil, 1,000 square kilometers, with an average thickness of 50 meters. Just imagine that. 1,000 square kilometers, the depth, the same as the length of an Olympic swimming pool. That's a lot of soil. So can we move? So National Park de Hoge Veluwe is about 55 square kilometers, and the average soil thickness is about 2 meters. So actually, yes, it is possible. We can move National Park de Hoge Veluwe using the same technology they use in Alberta, and we can move the Hoge Veluwe in 1 year. Actually, we can move 8 parks the same size as the Hoge Veluwe in a year if we use the same technology that they use in Alberta. Now, there is a problem because in Alberta, the oil and gas companies are working, right? And they completely pulverize the soil because they don't care about any living thing, literally, they just don't care. Now, trees don't like being pulverized. That just doesn't go well generally. However, EcoMove is also about microorganisms, and they are perfectly fine being transported in a big yellow truck. They don't care. You can mess it around a little bit. They can turn around a few times. It's fine. And that's also a very important part of EcoMove. Now, let's look at the second picture, because that is something trees like. You see that house? It can be moved on wheels without getting a scratch. Now, if we can do that with trees as well, which should be possible, trees really like it. And trees are a lot more flexible than bricks, so it should be absolutely fine. So yes, we can move an entire national park. And actually, moving the entire national park seems like a bit of an overkill, doesn't it? You don't have to move the entire park. Maybe 10% is enough to help the surrounding area from collapsing in terms of biodiversity. Nature can spread out. Nature is resilient. Maybe 10% is just enough. If that were the case, we can help 100 national parks per year become more resilient against climate change. Now, I can see some people thinking, hold on a minute, that might be very expensive. And yes, these trucks generally are really expensive. However, let's look at climate change. Let's look at the costs of climate change. Because if you take that into perspective, EcoMove is a bargain, really. Let's go for it. So, success. We have liftoff, yes. But no, there are actually a few more problems. Let's look at the first one. How much land do we need to move exactly? Do we need to move the entire national park? Is 10% enough? Can we move little patches of 1 by 1 kilometers? How much land do we need to move? How much land is sufficient to keep the surrounding nature healthy? Personally, I think this really depends on the climate zone. I think it's really different if you look at rainforests versus deserts. I think that really impacts how big the patches you need to move are. However, the point is, no one knows exactly how much land we need to move. So we need to do a bit of research. Now, there is a problem with research. In the Netherlands, we have something called profielwerkstuk. Every single Dutch high school student has to pick a topic and write a report about it. A lengthy report is a big part of your education in high school. Now, I had to do this as well because I just graduated. And for my profielwerkstuk, obviously, I chose EcoMove. Now, I was all set to start experimenting in the greenhouses of the University of Amsterdam. I was going to experiment with all kinds of different soils and climates. But then Corona hit. So I couldn't go to the greenhouses, and I had to make do with my own windowsill in my bedroom and my garden, which I did, because what else was I supposed to do? And I started experimenting with 2 variables. First of all, I had the climate. Now, I had 2 options. It's really straightforward. Either my plants were inside or they were outside. Inside or outside. Those were the 2 options. My second variable was the soil. And there I had 3 options. Either pure Dutch soil, pure Mediterranean soil, or a combination of the two. And then I sowed my plant seeds and I waited. And I counted and I measured their lengths and I measured their color spectra and I watered them. And I did this for months, okay? And I'm not complaining. I graduated cum laude. I'm very happy with my results. But I did this for months. And the point is, research takes a lot of time, like really a lot of time. And we need to do something now about climate change because the point of no return is very fast approaching. Maybe we're even past it. So time is a problem. Research is a problem because it takes time. Now, here's my problem list, right? Let's go to the next problem. My next problem, adults. Adults, they tend to require 100% accuracy before they want to start moving. Little kids run around, they try stuff, they make mistakes, they learn from it, and that works wonderful. But then they become adults and they become risk allergic. And that's a problem for EcoMove because no one is going to be able to figure out exactly what happens when you transport an entire ecosystem. It's not possible to know that before, to know what will happen before you actually transport the thing. But climate change is urgent. We need to do something now. And adults have a tendency to start debating and arguing and having meetings. Should we move this piece of nature from Brest to Eindhoven, or should we move this piece of nature from Rennes to Amsterdam? Maybe one of them is 5% more efficient and therefore 5% more expensive. And they can argue for this for 10 years, happily. Just arguing back and forth, not doing anything is my experience. However, the general direction is clear. If we want to look for a piece of nature that can go to the Netherlands, we just need to move south along the Atlantic coast, somewhere near Rennes, somewhere in that region. The direction is clear, and direction is important. Let me show you with an analogy in sailing, because I promised you a virtual sailing trip. Here we go. The future is not a fixed point. The future is a direction. And of course, we should aim well. We should avoid sandbanks, avoid rocks, avoid loss of biodiversity. But how important is it that we go exactly in the right direction? Most people want to do that. They want to find the exact direction they need to go in, and that's the only thing they want to do. If they can't find the exact direction, they give up. But how important is this? How well do we need to aim? Let's go on our trip. Imagine we're all captain on the little sailboat on the screen. Now, the green line shows our ideal course. That's where we want to go. However, there's headwinds and there is tides and there are sandbanks. So our actual course is the red line. We cannot go the green line. We have to sail in the red direction. It looks horrible, doesn't it? It's way off. Not even worth the effort, a politician might say. Way too expensive, economists might say. However, I'm a sailor. So let's go, let's do the math. But before we start, I invite you to make a guess. How much time are we going to spend in additional time because we could not go in the exact right direction? Do we have to spend 50% more effort? Is it maybe 20, maybe even 10? Make your guess, okay? Look at the screen and make your guess, right? Now, let's do math because I like math. The typical field of view of an image like this one is 40 degrees. Now, if we look at the distance between our two lines, we can estimate that we're about 10 degrees off with our actual course compared to our ideal course, right? It might seem like we're going in the entirely wrong direction, but intuition is slippery here. Let me show you. This is a top view of our virtual sailing trip. Now, you can easily verify that our detour D is 1 minus the cosine of the angle. Now, our angle was about 10%, right? If you do the math, you can discover that our detour is 1.5%. 1.5%, not 50, not 20, 1.5. Do you remember your guess? Did you guess it was as little as 1.5%? And that's the problem. because often we are way too pessimistic when it comes to our goals, the direction we want to go in, the things we want to achieve. We're way too pessimistic, and we don't want that. So it's worth understanding why this happens. And there's a very simple explanation. People assume that the world is linear. Economists, politicians, voters, they all make this mistake. They expect proportional responses because we live in a linear world, or so they think. However, we live on planet Earth, and planet Earth is a sphere. Well, it's an ellipsoid actually because we rotate, but it's definitely not linear. And this goes for big problems, global problems, but it also goes for our small little sailing trip. Because actually, our detour scales with the square of the angle. Now, our angle was 10 degrees, right? But we express this in radians. 10 degrees is about 0.17 radians. And if you take the square of a very small number, it becomes close to 0. So actually, our detour is only 1.5%. So the overall message is just go for it. It's worth the effort. Even if it seems like we're going slightly in the wrong direction, not everything's perfect yet. It's better to go. It's not a waste of time. You're always going from A to better, as long as the overall direction is even remotely right. And besides, you don't know the weather situation halfway through the trip anyway. Things can change halfway through. So it's better to just go. Because the future is a direction. And we don't need precision, we need action. Now, I have an example for you. Because I work for the Dutch Youth Climate Movement. I'm the acquisition manager, right? And I have had a lot of discussions about what companies we can contact to propose partnerships and sponsorships with. And what we did eventually is make a list of criteria. We have a list of criteria like transparency, being green, of course, not being involved in a lot of scandals. And we check our companies we might want to contact with our list. And if they pass, we can contact them and propose a sponsorship. Now, for example, Shell does not meet our criteria, not by a long shot for obvious reasons. So we won't be accepting money from Shell anytime soon. And this seems very easy, right? You have a list, you have a company, you check it, boom, you're done. However, in practice, it's much more difficult. Recently, for example, we found a wonderful company that manufactures solar panels, which is very important for our future. So we were all set to propose a partnership. However, at the last minute, a little tidbit of information turned up, something about child labor. That's not even a joke. And this happens a lot. And we're one of the more flexible youth organizations, and even we have this problem. So as the acquisition manager, I actually have a proposal. There is a company called Unilever. You might have heard of it. They make food, they make ice cream, tea, condiments, shampoo, air purifiers, everything. You get the gist. Now, Unilever, as a big multinational, does not meet our sponsor criteria. However, there is a small sub-company within Unilever called the Vegetarian Butcher. And they make a lot of wonderful vegetarian and vegan alternatives in the Netherlands. It's very popular. We, as the Dutch Youth Climate Movement, fully support the Vegetarian Butcher. And actually, because they are largely autonomous within Unilever, we can propose a partnership with them. And we might not agree with Unilever as a whole, but because they have this small sub-company called the Vegetarian Butcher, we can propose a partnership. And that's my proposal. Companies should split off a little part of their organization, right? And make that part future-proof. And then we, as youth organizations, can give a signal by supporting them and telling the rest of the world, look, this is the direction we want to go in. This is good. And we can help them. We can help promote them. We can help expand that part of their organization. And we can work towards a smooth transition to a sustainable future, right? But we need companies' help. They have to make the first step in splitting off a little part of their company and making it future-proof. And when they do that, we might even find a student who can make a better logo, because honestly, the Vegetarian Butcher logo, it might need some work. But the point is, if we just work, it's better if companies like Unilever just change overnight. Overnight, they become completely sustainable. That would be wonderful, but it's not realistic. So it's better to work step by step. Split off a small part of the organization, expand that part slowly, and go roughly in the right direction. And that brings me back to EcoMove, because there's one final problem with EcoMove. EcoMove is not a desirable solution. No one wants to transport many square kilometers of nature. No one wants that. But actually, that's the key message. Do you remember Jack, our fisherman from the story? Do you remember how he used words like tradition and heritage to evoke an emotional response in people? Without arguments, those words immediately have an emotional response. EcoMove is the same. As soon as you propose to move many square kilometers of trees and forest, people don't want it. It sounds wrong, and it is wrong because climate change is wrong. But actually, EcoMove is a very effective way to communicate that. You don't need arguments, you don't need scientific facts. You just need to say, let's move your childhood forest. And immediately, people will respond. And I have an example of this. I was sitting in the train from Paris to Marseille here earlier this week. And I was sitting next to a guy. You know the type. I just had a meeting in Paris and I'm going to Marseille for an executive meeting and a dinner. And then I'm going back to Corsica by plane the next morning. That type of guy, you know them. And he was looking over my shoulder and he was reading along with what I was doing. So I started telling him about EcoMove. I started showing him the climate matching tool. And slowly you could see him getting worried. And he asked me a question. Do you mind finding out what the climate is going to be like in northwest Romania? So, of course, I pulled up my climate matching tool. I started researching. I gave him graphs of rainfall and sunny days and minimum and maximum temperatures throughout the year. And as it turns out, in 20 years' time in northwest Romania, temperatures will not dip below 0 degrees on average. Even in wintertime, it's going to be warmer than 0 degrees. And that was a big problem for this guy because he had a vacation house there and he liked to go there during winter holidays because he liked snow. And snow and temperatures above 0 degrees Celsius do not go well together. And suddenly this big corporate guy had a concrete picture of the effects of climate change. And he started getting worried about it because suddenly it wasn't an abstract problem anymore where people in Marseille talk about it had effect on his daily life. He started getting worried about it. And this can help with a smooth transition towards a sustainable future because now he's much more likely to accept new measurements made by the government, like tax on pollution. So that day, it was mission accomplished. Day by day, one step at a time. And that brings me to my final slide, because working on EcoMove has been a great adventure for me, not only because of the results, but because of the road traveled. I met a lot of wonderful organizations, a lot of wonderful people, and it's impossible to thank everyone. But thank you, Carl, for allowing me to speak here. And I hope that EcoMove is not my final destination. I hope I can travel a lot further. But working for sustainability, fighting against climate change, is a continuous learning process. And if we want to change the world, we have to do that one step at a time, with confidence and celebrating each and every small achievement. And we have to include everyone, and that includes communicating with Jack on B1 level. But it's important to remember that 100% efficiency is not required. A rough sense of direction is enough. Just think of a train. It's bound by tracks. It literally cannot go exactly in the right direction. But still, I came here by train without any trouble. But what makes me really happy is that I solved the problem of ecosystems collapsing due to climate change. There is a solution. EcoMove sets the bar. It visualizes a primarily abstract problem and it opens the dialogue by providing an alternative. Now, I have 8 more minutes left. Okay, so this is a place where high-level decisions are made. So, as I said, I'm a speaker, and I would really like to end with a speech aimed at politicians and policymakers, and I hope that right here, maybe online, they can directly or maybe indirectly hear this. I wrote this last night, so I don't know it by heart yet, so I'm going to read it to you, and I'm sorry. Dear politicians, dear Jack, planet Earth is like an old sailboat in distress. It's sinking, heading for the rocks, storm approaching. Over the past decade, Earth has lost 25 to 95% of its biodiversity. And it's safe to say that we lost about half of our floating capacities during one generation. Not good. Let me explain the situation to you. Basically, there are three kinds of people on our ship. Some people panic. We're all gonna die, we're sinking, we're all gonna die. You've seen them, they run around shouting doom and disaster. But we also have business people, and they have started mounting cameras everywhere so they can film the crash and make money on YouTube. And finally, we have smart scientists. They happily measure sinking rates with nanometer precision. But dear politicians, none of these people will actually solve the problem. Therefore, politicians, it's up to you to save the ship. You are the captain. You need to do this. And here's the thing. Unfortunately, most politicians say that every ship has a little water in the bilge. They say that sinking is normal. They explain that some rocks are actually very soft and pleasant. And weather predictions can be wrong anyway. But I want to know, what kind of a captain are you? Will you join the screamers just to get their votes? Or do you say, oh, shut up, and followed by clear instructions on how to fix the hull? Tough decisions need to be made because the rocks are getting closer and the ship is not well maintained. In fact, the point of no return is in visible range. Do you hear the waves crashing, the wind increasing, rain pouring down? Do you realize the urgency? Rocks are not soft and pleasant, you know. Of course, we can do nothing. We can be optimistic, rely on a miracle. But you already did this, the last generation, and I'm sorry, but it didn't turn out that great. So now there are two options remaining. Do you start the old diesel engine, the engine that actually caused most of the trouble in the first place, heavy on resources, polluting, running out of fuel? Or finally, do you realize that the turning rate of planet Earth is not like an oil tanker? We can change quickly if we work in harmony. And there is only one thing that we need to do. Switch off the old engine, raise the sails, and sail away. Thank you.